the pushback.org. Go check it out. It's really a place where young people can find community and also push back on the ways in which the culture at large might view them, particularly teen parents. And you know, we have to take advantage of that engagement opportunity. Something that we're interested in and we're looking at right now organizationally is, in terms of engagement and in terms of organizing and mobilizing, kind of finding new ways to do that and finding ways to understand the impact of culture in that organizing and mobilizing, what's different about organizing and mobilizing across cultures, whether that be from youth and adult cultures or by race, ethnicity, or religion, trying to understand what's different culturally in those different settings in terms of our goals to mobilize and organize. And would love for the foundation community to look at that with us and think about that.
Great.
Just to point out one thing, I think it's really important. There, and I learned this very well at the Boston Foundation and practice it all through my work at the Brookline Community Foundation as well. And I think that the first and foremost, that foundations are really important places, and they have many different tools at their disposal to try to really drive change, make things happen, and support the nonprofit field. The first and foremost is the grant-making work that happens where, you know, you support the kinds of organizations that are doing really critical work in the community to make things happen. But then, you know, there are various initiatives and convenings that happen where you bring the community together around a particular issue, and who doesn't come to a meeting oftentimes that a foundation sort of hosts, you know, for some reason. You bring policymakers, leaders, and others together, and you have that opportunity to get people in the room to talk about these kinds of issues. And then finally, the leadership role that you play to really impact some of these critical areas. And that's one that isn't, it shouldn't be taken so lightly, because I think that these are big challenges that we have out there today, and these are important issues that are there. And I think that all of us, and while we're still sort of, you know, starting to learn this role, we need to do a much better job of really pushing harder and not being afraid to go after and address those kinds of issues. I think we're doing better over time, community foundations and philanthropy in general, but we do have a long way to go. But again, as I said, I'm encouraged that I see more and more people jumping into this and really trying to be able to support that kind of change.
But I also think there can be a danger, because I've seen a trend that I'm very concerned about, where I'm very clear that the role of a philanthropic foundation is we are there to support change. But in my humble opinion, the groups and communities and leaders that we fund should be leading the change, not us. And I think sometimes we confuse our roles. And maybe that's because of the philosophy that we have, but I think we absolutely get to elevate the platform of issues. I think our convening power, all those things are important. But when we start crossing that line further and further to speaking for the community, I think we have forgotten our role. I think we can have more power and create more change by actually supporting the communities who are closest to the ground and understand the issues, like your organization, to do the work. So I'm not here at Access Strategies Fund, although our goal is to promote access to democracy. People always say, well, Kelly, why don't you, do a media tour and talk about, what should change around redistricting? We have a new project to fund organizations to be a watchdog over the changing of political lines in this state. We're about to lose a congressional seat. It's not up to us to determine, how that seat, who should lose that seat and be the voice on it, but to fund those groups across the state who can be at the table and say, no, we want a public hearing, and we want to tell you why our seat should stay or how it should be changed. And so I think we have to be really careful about our role. I mean, I want us to be partners, but I think when we start leading the cause and organizing out of our offices, I think we've lost our way a little bit. I think funding the work that comes from the ground is really important. And one last thing I'll say on organizing and mobilizing, there was a recent study from the National Committee on Responsive Philanthropy, and I thought this was outstanding. They looked at and funded organizations that made very large impacts and changes on issues. And the ones that made those big systemic issues, that change that I was talking about, were those who had organizing programs, had advocacy programs, and they found that for every dollar that foundations invested in those projects, $157 return in terms of the amount of services, in terms of the amount of support and change that happened in their communities. So I think, obviously I'm going to push for us to invest more in civic engagement, but I would also caution us that we should support the agents of change. I think we should be very careful about being those agents.
Great. This actually, I think, leads to another topic we wanted to talk about, which was Alan talked about the importance of the public-private partnerships and intersectoral partnerships, but that basically we've all discovered that in order to make it any big change, even small change, it takes not just more of us, but more of people from many different sectors. And what are the best roles for philanthropy to play, for the nonprofit sector to play? So maybe, Richard, just starting with the community foundation, which often plays that neutral convener role, what would be your perspective?
Just want to piggyback on something that you said, because I actually think if you look at as an example of a piece of work that Kelly did recently regarding to the census equity work, I honestly don't know how much, like, your organization put that out there and sort of drove it. It was out there in the community of some things that really needed to happen, but Philanthropy sort of pushed it out there in a way where it got and rallied the community together to kind of get around that particular issue. There are times when that issue won't get out there, but, unless Philanthropy or some other organization pushes it out in front and perhaps begins to sort of educate and rally others around it. So we have to be responsible when we play that role, but we have to play that role. Right. Because I still look, having been an executive director in nonprofit organizations and then been in philanthropy for as long as I've been in, I've actually seen I see some of the same problems that I saw many, many years ago, and we're still looking at the same kinds of solutions to address them. And I actually think if that's the case, then we need to really be thinking differently and doing something differently. And so my feeling is I think that, we have to, kind of look at the lay of the land and the kind of partnerships and the organizations and programs that are out there doing things. I think we got to be honest with ourselves around, what might be the best way to address that particular challenge. Sometimes it's not the same organization that has been doing it over and over and over again the same way for many, many years. It may be that you got to poke, prod, push. You may have to, do something completely different. And I think philanthropy plays that role sometimes in terms of making that happen. It's about being responsible and knowledgeable, and if we're engaged in the community and involving the community in those decision-making processes, then I think we'll put the kind of partnerships, the kind of thinking together that will really make something happen that will be productive for the community versus looking at it as, foundations or philanthropy somehow is leading us in the wrong direction of some sort. We're part of the community. We need to listen and engage the community in that thinking.
So, the question is phrased as this dichotomy between the nonprofit sector and the private sector, and Alan talked about that a lot too. And I actually think that when we have that discussion, we're missing a really, really big piece of the pie here, especially in the Commonwealth. And that is there's this in-between sector. And so we can talk about a corporation in Massachusetts which has over $25 billion in assets, a tremendous research and development arm, great marketing organization, the best brand in the world. It's a not-for-profit. It's Harvard University. Right. We can talk about a great insurance company that I happen to work for. You all think of this insurance company. Tufts Health Plan is a mission-oriented, not-for-profit organization. I haven't done the math. I haven't looked at the numbers. I wouldn't be surprised if in Massachusetts that in-between sector takes up a bigger part of the economy than the not-for-profit sector, and maybe even, I doubt it, but you'd have to look at the private sector as well. So how do we motivate those in-between organizations to be focused in a public-oriented way? I don't have the answer, but I do think that's something we need to be asking ourselves.
Well, and there's also, many have talked that